This is my bamboo plant, Eve. I got her about 6 years ago, and she was 5 inches tall, and now she is taller than me. She's out of frame, actually. But welcome, Eve, to the channel. Howdy. Welcome back for this video. I appreciate each and every one of you. I have almost 160 subscribers now, which is insane. 160 people are interested enough in the stuff I'm just rambling about on here, and that's humbling and it's really cool. So thank you for subscribing. Today I want to introduce maybe a type of video that will continue on this channel going forward, a let's talk about video where I can come on here and really just express my love for these new authors that I'm finding. This is my second year really reading literature, so there's a lot to find out and a lot to explore, and not every author really captures my attention or like my heart in a sense, but when they do, it's really, really cool, and I want to share that experience with you guys. I had this experience last year when I read Cormac McCarthy, who I will forever be thankful for. He's the reason I am still reading books today. And then Dostoevsky, which, I mean, that one's maybe apparent. He is a great storyteller, really cool themes and philosophy. And reading this particular author, I got that same kind of sense where in one day from one of his books, I read like over 100 pages, which is really rare for me. I typically like to pace myself. But also, you know, I occasionally get a little bored sometimes when I'm reading and want to do other things. But for me to read 100 pages in a single day, just straight through because of how like interested I was, that is a testament. This only happened one other time with Crime and Punishment. I read like 180 pages one day, which I would not recommend doing, but it just sometimes you get sucked in and it's great. And so I guess I should share with you this author. This author is John Williams. John Williams is an author who published books from the 1960s to the late 1970s, I believe. His bibliography consists of 4 novels and, I believe, 2 poetry books. And his life's pretty interesting. In 1942, he enlisted. He enlisted into the United States Air Force and then spent 2 years overseas as a sergeant in different areas. But then he came back home, stateside, and went to Denver to get his master's and bachelorate in arts. And immediately after that, he went down to the University of Missouri, where he got his PhD in English literature and became an assistant professor. And all during this time, he was able to publish the novels and poetry books, like I mentioned. His first novel he put out, he was pretty young, and I believe he wrote it while he was serving. It's not considered that great. I'll probably end up reading it eventually, but I've heard it's not that good. The 2 I've read out of here completely blew me away, and I know Augustus eventually won the Pulitzer Prize, which is a testament. That's not an easy award to get. So this is a man who wrote really well and did not write enough, and it's unfortunate, but what he did leave us with are phenomenal stories, and I want to kind of break those down for you today. So out of the 3 books in here, I read Butcher's Crossing, which is a Western-style novel, and I read Stoner, which is a college novel. That's another thing that's really unique about him. His themes covered in these 2 novels, at least, are kind of similar, but they have widely different settings. They take place in totally different areas, and they're still very, very good. I haven't read Augustus yet because I was just not in the mood to read a historical fiction book about Rome. As cool as it is, I just wasn't in the mood for it. So I wanted more Westerns, so I'm reading Lonesome Dove right now. If you are at all interested in John Williams already as an author, please go read his works. Even if like you look up online like a synopsis of his books and are interested in them in any capacity, please go read them, because I don't want to butcher these books for you. Both Butcher's Crossing and Stoner were really, really good. So I would suggest turning off the video and going and reading those. But if you stick around, you can grab yourself a cup of tea, a cup of coffee, just hang out, let's have a conversation. Hey guys, editing Brent here. I never mentioned a spoiler warning, but if you've not read Butcher's Crossing, it's a good Western about a man joining a group of buffalo hunters. If you've not read it, stop the video, go read it, because I'm going to spoil the entire story. I just didn't know I was going to, but then I ended up doing that, so. Butcher's Crossing follows our character, William Andrews, as he travels from Boston to this kind of remote town out in the west of America. I forgot exactly the state that it's in. I'm sure it's mentioned somewhere in there. Andrews is a third-year student at Harvard College. He is financially pretty well off, and he's coming out to the West in search of something. He wants to rekindle his life with nature. Education is not giving him the life experience or it's not satisfying himself as a person. So he wants to come out West and just kind of rekindle with the land and all the nature that is out there. Sounds a lot like every 20-year-old I've ever met in my life, including myself. And that's kind of the theme of this whole novel, is Andrews just searching for something that I'm not sure entirely if he finds it. So Andrews gets to the town called Butcher's Crossing, and from there, he seeks out a man named McDonald, who, Mr. McDonald was a friend of Andrews' father. And Andrews eventually stumbles upon McDonald, and he's this kind of disheveled man. He has a little shed that he kind of works out of because he's a buffalo hide seller. And in the shed, it talks about stacks and stacks of paperwork that McDonald is vehemently kind of putting off. He hates doing it. And Andrew goes in there and he's like, hey, I kind of want a job. Like, can I become a buffalo hunter? And McDonald is like, no, like, that's not a good idea. If you want a job from me, I will let you handle the paperwork here, but I think it's bad, a man like you, trying to get in with buffalo hunting. And Andrews is like, why that? And McDonald does not want him to become a buffalo hunter because he sees that this is a young man who's innocent, and he has seen what buffalo hunting kind of does to people insofar as it makes them really rough. They kind of lose their innocence, and he wants to save Andrews from that. And Andrews is like, well, I don't want to do that, so what can I do? So Mr. McDonald tells him, go find this guy named Miller. He should be in the saloon, and you can talk to him about it. That, this is necessarily inspired by it, but it did remind me of the man that talks to Ishmael and Queequeg before they board Captain Ahab's ship. He just kind of gives them a warning, like you don't really want to get on the ship right now because it's not going to fare well for you. And the same thing is reflected in Blood Meridian with the Mennonite in the town that talks to the kid and the filibuster gang before they traverse down into Mexico. It's almost prophetic in a way of bad things are going to happen to you and our main character. Obviously, any 20-year-old, myself included, would probably hear something like that and against our better judgment be like, no, I'm going to still do these things. And so from there, Andrews goes and finds Miller in the tavern. And Miller's with a man named Charlie Hodge, who Charlie Hodge has no left hand. It got frostbite on their last buffalo excursion. And Miller has to cut off his hand. So he lives without this hand, and he is deeply wounded from that experience. And his vice of choice that he picks up is whiskey. Charlie Hodge is constantly drinking from sunup to sundown. And it's this weird kind of relationship, too, because Miller kind of takes care of Charlie, but he also supplements Charlie with all this liquor. He constantly is ordering it. Eventually, they take it on them when they go out, when they go north to hunt these buffalo. And but I'm getting ahead of myself here. So Andrews and Miller get to talking, and Miller tells them exactly what they're going to need and how much money it's going to cost. And like I mentioned earlier, Andrews, I keep calling him Williams. Andrews is pretty financially set, so he gives about half his money away to Miller. And the next morning, Miller rides out of town and is gone for a week in order to get the supplies and also locate a skin man to help them skin the buffalo that they're going to kill. And during this time, Andrews has an encounter with a sporting woman named Francine who works at the saloon, and Francine kind of lusts after Andrews, and she tries to make a move on him. And part of her reasoning is because she sees Andrew as this kind of like pure and innocent man. Being a sporting woman, she probably has a lot of experience with these other really rugged buffalo hunters and skinners. And she sees this kind of pure innocence in Andrews that she wants to almost take advantage of and have to herself before he goes on this buffalo hunt, inevitably, because she also prophesies to him that it's going to change him. She's saying, like, you will come back and your skin's going to be worn, your hands are going to be rough. And Andrews kind of is okay with it, and then he freaks out and leaves. So then by that time, Miller comes back from his journey. He's got a bunch of stuff. He's got a bunch of ox, he's got some horses, he's got a wagon, and he brings along this man named Schneider, who I think Schneider is almost this voice of reason in some capacity throughout the story. And from there, they go on this trek north to this area where Miller swears that there is a big buffalo herd that is untouched. I guess I should have mentioned this earlier, but for context, buffalo hunting was so rampant at this part of time that buffalo were, I think, pretty near to the extinction, which is something that you see a lot in early America, is this kind of overzealous fixation on hunting. It could be said with, I think, wolves, I think, were also endangered at one point. Buffalo, for sure, and whaling, which is kind of what Moby Dick focuses on. I haven't finished it, but it's kind of what that focuses on. It's just that we're taking so much from the environment and we're not letting it kind of take care of itself and kind of regrow and repopulate, and we are just killing indiscriminately for our own needs. Miller in the tavern tells him he hasn't been hunting buffalo in about 10 years or so, but he knows a spot up in Colorado where the buffalo are plenty and there's a lot there for them to kill, and he's been almost plotting this trip in his mind. He just can't find anyone to go with him until Andrew shows up. So eventually they leave Butcher's Crossing, and it is almost a crap show. Things just start going kind of wrong almost immediately. There's a point where they come up to a river and they store up some water because it's going to be the last bit of water they can take, and they start heading in this other direction away from this river. And Miller is confident. He's like, hey, I know this land. In like 2 days, we'll hit the river again. And that doesn't happen. I think it takes almost like 4 or 5 days for them to hit the river again. And by that point, everything's kind of slowed down. The men have not had water, and it's been really hot out. The animals are not working too well. Along this trip of the trail where they will wet a rag with whatever water they have left, and they let it soak on the ox's tongues so they don't swell and the ox don't suffocate. But then finally they reach the river, and once they reach the river, they see kind of like the mountains that they are going to be hunting in. So they restock at the river, and then they start going through the woodlands up into the mountains. And I actually have a section here I'd like to read for you guys, because this kind of blew me away. The writing's beautiful, but this kind of blew me away, and I'll explain why. For a moment, as he and Schneider and Miller pressed their horses directly into the face of the forest, Andrews had a sensation of sinking, as if he were being absorbed downward into a softness without boundary or mark. The sound of their horses' breathing, the clop of their hooves, and even the few words the men spoke were all absorbed in the quiet of the forest, so that all sound came muted and distant and calm, one sound much the same as the another. Whether it was the snort of a horse or a spoken word, it was all reduced to soft thuds which seemed to come not from themselves but from the forest, if there beat within it a giant heart for anyone to hear. And at the time I read that, it kind of blew me away, because I've had experiences just like that. Plus the passage is written beautifully. In the state that I live in, one of the universities has a bunch of nature sanctuaries plotted all along the state. And I've been to one that is about 25 minutes away from me, where you cannot hear. It's usually pretty vacant there. There's not a lot of people that come in and out of there. And all it is are these tall, thick trees. And sometimes I go in there in a hammock. But you cannot hear at all the sound of the road. You cannot hear people walking. You cannot hear people talking. It is like a sense of sinking or drowning, where you are just totally enveloped by the calmness of the woods. But there's something like eerie and a little haunting about that, but also a little beautiful. So that was really cool to read. And finally, they cross up this mountain, and there are thousands and thousands of these buffalo laying in this little valley between the mountains. And that is the cannon fodder. That's the stock that these men are going to be hunting from. So they set up camp, and almost immediately they bring out lead. And I think there's probably some more symbolism to this, but I think it is just an interesting note that Miller actually crafts all the bullets that he uses. It's not like nowadays where you can go to a weapons shop and buy a carton or a case of bullets that are all pre-made, ready to go. Miller actually melts down the lead and has a mold in which he produces the balls that he will be firing from his musket. And I think it's just an integral note there of just it's almost personal in a sense. Like, he's working on the devices that will be the demise of these innocent buffalo. And so from there, everything kind of spirals downward. They start their hunt, I think, a few days after they get there, and Miller just, gosh, it's like a little haunting. It's a little scary. I don't want to say Miller is like the judge from Blood Meridian, because that judge is just a encompassment of pure evil. But Miller has that zeal in him, that overzealousness, where he is just kind of maniacal. He's just frightening in his lust to kill and skin these buffalo. There's a point in the novel after he starts hunting where Andrews has to go get another rifle because the barrel on Miller's is getting too hot. And he just is rhythmically shooting and killing and hitting these buffalo. And there's this depiction of Miller, too, during this time where his face is getting full of the black gun smoke. And he almost refuses to wash it off. And then later, when Miller helps skin these buffalo, he doesn't clean his face from the blood. He is just a mess. And during this time too, over the subsequent weeks, I think they spend a couple months up there hunting the single herd of buffalo until it's entirely gone. Miller withdraws into himself and becomes silent, and I don't want to use the word stoic, but yeah, he becomes stoic and stops talking to the other guys and is constantly focusing on the buffalo. And it's just it's not scary, it's just haunting. It's just really haunting. I'm going to read to you another passage from along this point of time here. This is a long one, so buckle up. Gradually, the herd was worn down. Everywhere he looked, Andrew saw the ground littered with naked corpses of buffalo, which sent up a rancid stench to which he had become so used to that he hardly was aware of it. And the remaining herd wandered placidly among the ruins of their fellows, nibbling at grass flecked with their own dry brown blood. With his awareness of the diminishing size of the herd, there came to Andrews the realization that he had not contemplated the day when the herd was finally reduced to nothing, when not a buffalo remained standing. For unlike Snyder, he had known, without questioning or without knowing how he knew, that Miller would not willingly leave the valley so long as a single buffalo remained alive. He had measured time and had reckoned the moment and place of their leaving by the size of the herd, and not, as had Schneider, by numbered days that rolled meaninglessly one after another. He thought of packing the hides into the wagon, yoking the ox, which were beginning to grow fat on inactivity, and the rich mountain grass to the wagon, and making their way back down the mountain and across the wide plains back to Butcher's Crossing. He could not imagine what he thought of. With a mild shock, he realized that the world outside the wide, flat, winding park hemmed on all sides by sheer mountain had faded away from him. He could not remember the mountain up which they had labored, or the expansive plain over which they sweated in thirst, or Butcher's Crossing, which he had come into and left only a few weeks before. The world came to him fitfully and unclearly, as if hidden in a dream. He had been here in the high valley for all that part of his life that mattered, And when he looked out upon it, its flatness, its yellow-greenness, its high walls of mountains wooded with the deep green of pine, in which ran the flaming red gold of turning aspen, its jutting rock and hillock, all roofed with an intense blue of the airless sky, it seemed to him that the contours of the place followed beneath his eyes, that his very gaze shaped what he saw, and in turn gave his own experience form and place. He could not think of himself outside of where he was. During the rest of the story of their time in the mountains, I almost had the same kind of idea of that movie, The Lighthouse, where it's not necessarily expounded upon, but just this kind of being stuck and with these same people and kind of the madness that would have to ensue during that time. Finally, after I think over maybe 2 months of hunting and skinning these buffalo ritually daily, a snowstorm, a violent snowstorm hits. And during this part of the story, Charlie Hodge starts kind of losing his mind with the sight of the snow. He kind of has this breakdown. He never recovers from it the rest of the story. So the snowstorm hits, and the men have to hunker down and actually wait out the entire winter until the snowstorm, depletes, demises. And eventually that happens, so they realize, hey, we have way too many pelts. What we're going to do is we're going to stash them here. We're going to take what we can on the wagon and head back for Butcher's Crossing. And so they load up the wagon, and you can look out over this valley and see all of the buffalo just rotting, dead, stinking in this valley. And that's another point, too, is just the fact that these men are killing the buffalo solely for the hides. I know in Native American culture, obviously they respected nature as a whole, but when they would hunt a buffalo, they would make sure to use every single part of the buffalo. And I think this is just a contrast of the European settlers that came to America and just their disregard for everything, just for the one thing. So now there's an entire valley where thousands of buffalo now lay dead, and their bones are no good, their meat is no good. All that has been saved of them is the hides. So with all the snow melting, the river that they cross over before they get to the mountains is now rushing very rapidly from all this extra water that is coming into the river. So they start trying to cross the river, and it's going okay. And then eventually a dislodged tree from all the snow gets sucked into this river, and it's roaring so loud that the men cannot hear each other. And Snyder is standing about right here. Let's say the river runs this way. It's running this way. Snyder is standing right here on his horse, and Charlie is over here with the wagon trying to get the ox through this kind of the shallower part of the river, which is by no means super shallow. And this tree is dislodged, and it hits the side of Snyder, who then collides in with the wagon, and they lose everything. Like, the months of work, the months of having to hang out in the snow-covered wasteland, it's all gone. It's all for naught. So Schneider's dead. They lose the wagon. They get back to Butcher's Crossing, and the town is desolate. They don't know anyone who's there anymore. There's no people there. So they try to go to McDonald's little shed that he worked out of. It's completely abandoned. It's dirtier than usual in there. And eventually the men go and find McDonald, and McDonald lets them know that the buffalo market has crashed. So this book just follows Andrews as he is searching for something more. He's searching for his calling. He wants to be out in the world. And he thinks buffalo hunting might be a good option, And he spends so much money and so much time trying to hunt down all these buffalo. Sorry, there's people walking by. Trying to hunt down all these buffalo to make money off of it. And he gets back, and the whole industry of buffalo fur trading is done. It kind of reminds me, too, that's like what happened with beaver pelts almost overnight. The market for them just dwindled and died out. Miller and Charlie Hodge leave to go to the saloon, and Andrew stays back with Mr. McDonald. And Mr. McDonald drops one of the hardest paragraphs of all time. I'm just going to read this Excerpt from this section again. Young people, McDonald said, always wanting to start from scratch. I know. You never figured that someone else knew what you was trying to do, did you? Never thought about it, Andrew said. Maybe because I didn't know what I was trying to do myself. Do you know now? Andrews moved restlessly. Young people, McDonald said contemptuously, you always think there's something to find out. Yes, sir, Andrews said. Well, there's nothing, McDonald said. You get born, and you nurse on lies, and you get weaned on lies, and you learn fancier lies in school. You live all your life on lies, and then maybe when you're ready to die, it comes to you that there's nothing but yourself and what you could have done. Only you ain't done it, because the lies told you that there was something else. Then you know you could have had the world, because you're the only one that knows the secret. Only then it's too late, and you're too old. And I think that just perfectly ties in the entire story into itself. Andrew spends all this money and all this time, and there's nothing to show for it. There's literally nothing to show for it. And from there, Andrews kind of goes through this period of reflection, and Miller goes crazy. Charlie Hodge never recovers, and Andrew just eventually rides out of Butcher's Crossing. So I just kind of like explained the entire story of Butcher's Crossing to you. I am sorry. And this book it's less than 300 pages. I think it's about 250 pages. And that's one of the things I really appreciate about John Williams, is that with this book and with Stoner, there is not a single page that is wasted. There's never a point in one of these books where I'm like, why is he going on about this? A good example I'm going to bring up here, I'm reading Lonesome Dove currently, where McMurtry spent 6.5 pages detailing the creation of this sign for it to just be a one-liner of a joke. And it was something that, like, as I was reading it, I'm like, why does this matter? You know, not that I'm not enjoying Lonesome Dove, I am, but it was just one of those things where it's like, what is like the whole point of spending 6.5 pages for this joke? You know, where it's almost never brought up again. But John writes with a passion and a directness, which I really appreciate. I think it's one of the reasons I like Dostoevsky so much, is because he tells you exactly what he's thinking. Where you have other authors like Cormac McCarthy, who's a very show, don't tell kind of author. And sometimes that gets a little like too heavy to read. But I love when an author is just like, this is how it is, and waste not a moment of the reader's time. Howdy, Editing Brent here again. The way I structure that sentence makes it sound like Cormac McCarthy wastes the reader's time, and that is not at all the case. Where John Williams, there's not a page wasted. With McCarthy, there's not a word wasted. You know, I think this video is probably getting long enough. I had intended to talk about Stoner, but I also feel like Stoner is just something you just need to read. It is a tragic, beautiful, depressing, hopeful story of a man's life. And it's just ordinary. And I think it is just such a phenomenal novel. A lot of people consider it a perfect novel. I mean, I might throw it up in there too. But despite what I told you of Butcher's Crossing, there's still a lot to be read if you haven't read it before. And if you watched this whole video and had not read it, I'm sorry that I had butchered the plot. The story's stuck with me this entire month since I read it in about the first week and a half of the month. And yeah, it is just so good. He kind of goes on these tangents too that are almost reminiscent of McCarthy. I wonder if McCarthy was a John Williams fan, because all of his books came out before McCarthy wrote a lot of his really big works, and you kind of get the same impression where Williams will just start talking and he just continues a sentence, he continues the structure out, where he is just describing the landscapes and describing nature around him. McCarthy kind of takes that and it's on steroids, where he's a lot more bold with the prose, and it's very risky in some sense. And that is one of the reasons why he is so revered, is because he breaks a lot of the rules, but it's tasteful and it's good. And I think Williams kind of does a lot of that too. So I really hope that you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for supporting. I will be back soon, hopefully with another video. And I love you. God bless. Thank you for watching.